Thank you,
I'd
Patty.
like to introduce, thank you, Art. I'd like to introduce Art Litsky of Dober Litsky Mate. He is principal of the firm, and he is going to present information about the THEC formula, and we'll be going through primarily classrooms and labs in this section. Art.
Thanks, Patty. So just to remind you, the original THEC formula was developed in 2008, 2009, and then it was modified a little bit in 2013 to bring it up to its current version. So let me take you through how to think about these guidelines. This is the table of contents from the user manual that comes with the spreadsheet that is part of the guidelines. And we're going to be looking basically at this set of spaces, part 1 through 7. And that's what we're going to be concentrating on this morning. Essentially, these categories are defined by the FICM code, Facility Information Classification Manual, and their particular coding is on the right-hand side for each of them. For number 7, physical education, we've removed the recreational part to it because it's really just focusing on physical education. So this is the manual that came out in 2006. This was the revised manual, revised actually from 1998, I think it was the last one before that. And these are all the different definitions along the right side of your screen. But basically it is classrooms, laboratories, office, studies, special, and general. And we're going to concentrate really just on these particular coding that's part of the E&G that THEC is focusing on. One important part of this is how you measure space, and the FICM manual defines gross square feet as a measurement from the exterior wall to the exterior wall, all the space in between from the wall itself to the wall itself across both vertically and horizontally. And in the case of open spaces, so for instance, on the ground floor, there is a that sort of two white boxes. You wouldn't count that as part of the gross because that's just open space in the floor. But otherwise, everything else would be counted as gross. So net assignable square feet for the same building would be all the other spaces that are assigned to different departments and different units, where you're measuring the perimeter wall, the P line, as Carl Manka would say. And you'd add up all those separate spaces. And then, of course, there's the mechanical spaces, circulation spaces, and so on. These are not net assignable spaces. These are net usable spaces. So what we're interested in is in that middle graphic, the net assignable square feet. So the spreadsheet that comes along with this, with the manual, user's manual, has a color code system where blue boxes or blue cells in the spreadsheet are places where you as an institution would put in data. The pink cells is part of the guidelines that automatically run when you put in information in the blue boxes. So these are places that they're basically they're locked cells, but they are part of the guidelines and they're planning inputs that run the model. So basically all you have to do is worry about the blue cells, and they are for your data. Pink cells are part of the guidelines themselves. So the model or the guidelines start where it's asking for information about student enrollment. And we're looking for FTE and head count. And we're looking for basically all the folks that are on campus, on ground, FTE and head count. And then we separate out those who are online as FTE. And we also are looking for the number of students in residential setting. But all you have to do is enter this once in those blue boxes, and then it will ripple through the rest of the model, the rest of the guidelines. So you don't have to enter it again when data for the number of students is going to be required as part of the guidelines. One thing I think that THEC and you all will need to think about is how do you deal with the 2020 numbers? Because the enrollment this year is going to be anomalous. It's not going to be an even picture for last year or for the year beyond this. So one way or another, I think there needs to be some agreement about which numbers you should use for the coming year. And it could simply be that you use last year's numbers as a way to continue your planning. But I think that has to be worked out with THEC. So classrooms, that's the first part one of the data that the guidelines addresses. And it uses information that comes from the registrar's course file. This is information that every registrar should have and be able to spit out in a way that makes sense so you can use it. But typical information is building, room, the day of the week that the room is being scheduled, the start time and the end time, the start date and the end date, because not all courses start at the beginning of the semester or end at the end of the semester. The section number, the subject, course, section, faculty name, zip code, and the enrollment, student section enrollment should be after drop add, because usually that's the time when the numbers more or less stabilize for planning purposes. All this information is useful as you start to think about the type of information that's going to be put into this spreadsheet. So basically, we're looking for information that would show up in the FICOM classroom category, the 100 spaces, as well as lectures and so on. We're also looking at courses that meet in auditoriums, FICOM 610. Even though they are not classrooms, they're still typically scheduled as classrooms. And we've found that conference rooms are also scheduled to be used sometimes as classrooms, and we're looking for information on that as well. Be careful about cross-registered courses so that we only see them as one course, actually, not two courses meeting in the same room. We're only looking for credit-bearing courses also. And the scheduling window for the day program is from 7 in the morning until 5 at night. Some campuses, their classroom needs are actually generated by the evening program. Most of your campuses, if not all of your campuses, I think classrooms, the needs for classrooms and the schedule of classrooms is basically set by the day program. So that's what we're looking at here. So there are three measures for looking at classrooms. One is the hours per week that the room is scheduled. The second is the proportion of seats that are filled when the room is scheduled. And the third is the amount of space allocated to each student section, station, or chair. So the guidelines say that a typical classroom should be scheduled 30 hours per week during the daytime. If you're looking at nighttime, then it's really 17 hours per week. But basically for the day program, which is what we're concentrating on in the guidelines, 30 hours per week. When you're thinking about a possible 40 to 45-hour window for scheduling during the day. The guidelines also suggest that on average, you should fill the room, the proportion of seats that are occupied when the room is scheduled, 60% of the seats should be filled. And the square feet will vary depending upon the type of furniture, the number of students, and so on. So here's a typical way that space standards apply. In the left-hand side, the first column is the room capacity in terms of numbers of seats in the room. The next column is the net assignable square feet if it's a table and chair environment, which is higher than the next column, which is a tablet armchair, where the tablet is connected to the chair in some way. And you need less space per tablet armchair than you do for table and chair. And we're simply using, for this set of guidelines, the average between the two of those. So in the last column on the right-hand side would be 26 square feet per seat on average for that category. You'll notice that the square feet per seat gets smaller as the number of seats increases. And the reason for that is that the fewer the number of seats, the more of the circulation that you have to account for, by each seat. And the more seats you have, the smaller the proration of circulation space. So it goes from 26 square feet in a room that has 10 to 19 seats in it, down to 14 or less for a room that has 275 seats or greater. But that's the number, this is the column that we're using for generating space for now. But one thing I think that THEC and you all need to think about is whether or not the needs to be modified a little bit to deal with some of the changes that have been going on in pedagogy, particularly in terms of active learning and how to deal with an active learning space. Is it a classroom, or is it a studio, or is it a laboratory? So here's the first spreadsheet, part one, classrooms. What we're looking for is the number of sections and the total weekly classroom hours by section size. So on the very left-hand side, again, we have the number of seats or sections in the room, the number of seats or stations in the room, then the number of sections. And basically all we're looking for are those blue boxes to be filled out. Everything else runs automatically. The station utilization, 60%, is a given guideline. The 30 hours per week is a given guideline. And so here we're looking for two things, the number of sections and the contact hours. But we're looking for it by size of room, because we have found that the more specific you are in terms of dividing this or distributing the information by size of room, the more accurate the analysis will be. So I just made up some numbers looking at 21 to 26 students in a room. There were 180 sections that had 21 to 26 students in a room, and the total number of hours were 540 hours. So the rest of this happens automatically in the spreadsheet. If we have 21 to 26 students in a room at 60% seat fill, then you need a classroom of 40 seats. The net square feet per station, coming from the chart that I showed you previously, is 18 square feet in a room of that size. The net square feet per classroom then is 40 times 18 is 720. That happens automatically. The number of classrooms is 30 hours, which is the guideline, into the 540 total classroom hours, means that you should have 18 classrooms for those 540 hours. And 720 times 18 means that you should have 12,960 square feet for that category of classrooms. But if you were to fill in all of the different section sizes on the left-hand side, this whole chart will be filled in, and then at the very bottom, you know the total amount of classrooms that that would be required based upon size of rooms, based upon the number of students. So for part two, instructional laboratories and studios, it's the same metrics, same hours per week, same proportion of seats or stations, and the same amount of space, but it differs because it's a laboratory and studio. So here, for laboratories and studios, the guidelines suggest that a typical lab or studio should be used 15 to 20 hours per week, because you need the time to set up the room, you need the time to clean up the room, you need the time to break it down and make it ready for the next group of students coming in. It also assumes that, what's going on here? It also assumes that the station count or the proportion of seats that are scheduled should be 80%. And the reason that it's higher than classrooms is because laboratories can be controlled. You know the number of students that are taking those courses, and you can control when they happen. And so you could fill the rooms more efficiently than you could in a classroom. So 80% of the seats should be filled. And the amount of space per station depends upon the discipline. So here we have the different categories of disciplines that require space. Category A is more space needed, more space generated for the types of disciplines that fall into that category. So automotive, aviation, aerospace, construction, mechanical engineering, metal shop, welding, and so on. These require more space per student than someone in, for instance, in category D, which would be, anthropology, biology, foreign language, and so on. So essentially what you need to do is to be able to decide which category for the sections that you're going to be looking at. So I'm going to stop here because I think this is as far as we've gone in the other recording, but essentially what you're looking for is the number of sections in each of those disciplines. So for instance, in discipline C, which is 75 square feet per station for architecture, for biochemistry, for biophysics, and so on, you need the number of weekly lab hours, total enrollment, and then again, at 80%, a lab of 22 section sizes would require a lab of 28 seats. The number of square feet per seat comes from the discipline. Net square feet per lab is 75 times 28. Number of labs is 20 hours per week into the total weekly lab hours. 101 means you need 5 labs. And again, it sort of works its way through.
Thank you, Art.
You want me to do it again?
Appreciate it. And
would you like me to do it again?
I think it was great. So we'll just say that the other video can be referenced for the balance of the presentation on the other categories. Thank you, Art.
My pleasure. You guys can actually do it now.